In the still heat of a Texas summer night, a man is digging. His hands are blistered, his shirt soaked in sweat. But this isn't just a hole in the ground. It's a grave. And the person he's burying is the woman he once promised to love forever. The neighbors thought he was the perfect husband, a respected lawyer, a man who had it all. But a single revelation would turn that love into something darker than hate. This is the story of how a hidden truth in one Texas marriage ended in murder and a body buried in the backyard. Before we dive into this case, make sure you subscribe so you never miss stories like this. If you're already part of the community, welcome back. These real-life cases take hours of research to bring to you, so your support means a lot. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let's see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, before the digging, before the lies, to when this Texas lawyer's life looked perfect from the outside. Mark Ellison was known in San Antonio as the kind of lawyer you wanted on your side. Sharp in the courtroom, polite in public, and generous at church fundraisers, he carried himself like a man whose life was in perfect order. He met Claire at a charity dinner in 2014. She was striking, confident, and carried an air of mystery that drew people in. Friends would later say that from the moment Mark saw her, he was hooked. Within months, they were inseparable, attending every public event together, smiling for photographs that made them look like the city's golden couple. Their wedding was small but elegant, held in the backyard of Mark's family home. Guests remembered the way he looked at her, like nothing else in the world mattered. For years after, they seemed untouchable, the picture of a strong marriage built on love, respect, and shared ambition. But beneath the surface, there were cracks, small at first, almost invisible. Cracks that would grow deeper with every passing year, leading to a night neither of them could take back. It began with late nights at the office. At least that's what Mark told Claire. As a lawyer, long hours weren't unusual, but she started noticing changes. His phone glued to his hand, his tone sharper than before, his patience wearing thin over the smallest things. Claire, too, had secrets. She kept certain parts of her past locked away, telling Mark only what she thought he needed to know. He never pushed too hard, assuming that whatever she had been through before meeting him was better left in the past. But whispers have a way of traveling in small circles. One evening, over drinks with a colleague, Mark heard something that unsettled him, a passing remark about Claire's old life before they met. The comment was vague, almost careless, but it lodged in his mind and refused to leave. From that moment on, the trust that had once been effortless between them began to feel fragile. Mark started watching her more closely, noticing inconsistencies in her stories, moments where her expression shifted just enough to raise questions he had never dared to ask. The truth came to Mark on an ordinary Tuesday. He had returned home early from court, planning to surprise Claire with dinner. Her purse was on the kitchen counter, her phone half slipped out. Mark had never been the type to snoop, but something in him, that growing unease, pushed him to pick it up. Inside her messages, he found a conversation that stopped him cold. It wasn't just the words, but the way they hinted at a past he knew nothing about. A past that made him question everything, their wedding, their intimacy, even the very foundation of their marriage. He confronted her that night. At first, Claire tried to deflect, then to laugh it off, but when Mark pressed harder, her shoulders slumped. She told him the truth, the kind of truth that could not be untold. In that moment, Mark's world shifted. The woman he thought he knew became a stranger standing in his kitchen. From then on, something inside him changed. What had once been love was now tangled with betrayal, humiliation, and a simmering anger he could not control. In the days that followed, the air in their home grew heavy. Conversations were short, glances colder, and the silence between them stretched longer than either could bear. Mark still went to work, still argued cases in court with the same fire as before. But when he came home, he barely looked at her. Claire tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. She cooked his favorite meals, left little notes on the counter, even suggested a weekend away to reset. But each attempt only seemed to fuel his resentment. To him, every smile felt like a mask, every touch a calculated move to hide the truth. Friends began to notice. At a dinner party, a colleague mentioned that Mark barely spoke to his wife all evening, spending most of the night staring into his drink. In private, Mark's thoughts grew darker. He replayed their conversations over and over, twisting each memory into proof that their marriage had been built on lies. By the third week, he had stopped speaking to her altogether unless absolutely necessary. That unspoken tension, thick and suffocating, was about to snap. And when it did, it would do so violently. It was a humid Friday night in late August. Mark had stayed at the office longer than usual, not because of work, but because he didn't want to go home. When he finally walked through the door, the house was quiet, except for the faint sound of music coming from the kitchen. Claire was there, barefoot, humming to herself as she poured a glass of wine. She greeted him softly, but there was something in her voice, a mix of hope and nervousness. She handed him a glass, saying they needed to talk. Mark set it down untouched. For a long moment, they just stood there, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them. When Claire finally spoke, it wasn't an apology. It was an attempt to explain, to convince him that the past didn't matter, that what they had now was real. But to Mark, her words sounded like manipulation. One more performance in a marriage he now saw as fraudulent. The argument escalated quickly. Words turned sharp, accusations flew, and years of trust crumbled in minutes. Then, in a moment, Mark would replay in his mind again and again. Something inside him snapped. The anger, the betrayal, the humiliation, it all erupted at once. By the time the shouting stopped, the room had fallen into a silence that would never be broken again. Mark stood in the middle of the kitchen, his chest heaving, his hands trembling. The reality of what he had done began to sink in, but instead of panic, there was a cold, deliberate stillness. He knew there was no undoing it, only covering it up. He went to the garage and pulled out a shovel. The backyard soil was dry and hard, cracking under each thrust of the blade. Sweat rolled down his face as he dug deeper, the night air thick and unmoving. Every sound seemed amplified. The scrape of metal on stone, the rustle of leaves in the dark. But the neighborhood stayed silent. When the hole was finally deep enough, he returned to the house and carried her out. No neighbors saw, no lights flicked on. He lowered her into the ground, the moon casting pale light over the scene. One shovelful at a time, he buried not just her, but the life they had built together, sealing it beneath layers of earth. When it was done, he stood over the fresh mound, breathing hard, his shirt clinging to his skin. To anyone looking from afar, he was just a man in his yard on a summer night. But under his feet lay the truth he would now spend every waking moment trying to hide. Mark knew the burial was only the first step. The real challenge would be making sure no one ever asked the questions that could lead to that spot in the yard. He scrubbed the kitchen floor until his knees ached, wiping away every trace of what had happened. He gathered her belongings and her purse, phone, jewelry, and locked them in his office. He even went through her car, removing anything that tied her to the house. The next morning, he began crafting his story. To friends and family, he said Claire had gone to visit an old friend in Houston. He sounded calm, convincing, even managing a faint smile when people asked when she'd be back. He knew exactly how to play the part of the worried husband without letting his voice betray him. But lies have a way of unraveling. Claire had friends who spoke to her almost daily. When their calls went unanswered, they started asking questions Mark couldn't dodge forever. Each knock at the door, each ring of the phone, brought with it the risk that everything he'd buried would be uncovered, both in the ground and in his past. It began quietly, a few phone calls from friends who were just checking in. Mark stuck to his story, repeating it with the same calm tone every time. But within days, those friends reached out to Claire's sister, and that's when things started to shift. Her sister drove to San Antonio unannounced, expecting to find Claire at home. Instead, she found Mark alone, standing in the doorway with a forced smile. She didn't buy his explanation, not for a second. Within hours, she filed a missing person report. Detectives arrived the next morning. They were polite at first, asking routine questions: when he last saw her, what she was wearing, whether she seemed upset. Mark's answers were quick, rehearsed, but the way he avoided eye contact didn't go unnoticed. They asked to look around the house. Mark agreed, confident he had cleaned everything. But trained investigators see what most people miss: a faint stain near the kitchen baseboard, a section of soil in the backyard that looked freshly turned despite the dry weather. What began as a missing person case was about to turn into something much darker, and Mark could feel the control he thought he had slipping away. 2 days later, police returned with a warrant. This time, they didn't knock politely. They moved with purpose. Mark stood frozen in the doorway as officers stepped past him, heading straight for the backyard. Within minutes, the shovel hit something solid. The investigators worked in grim silence until the truth lay exposed under the harsh Texas sun. Mark didn't say a word. He didn't protest, didn't plead. As the cuffs clicked around his wrists, the life he had built, the career, the respect, the carefully crafted image, collapsed in an instant. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as he was led to the waiting patrol car. By evening, his name was on every local news broadcast. The respected lawyer was now the prime suspect in a murder case that had shocked the entire city. The trial was swift. Prosecutors painted him as a man who let pride and betrayal drive him to the unthinkable. His defense tried to argue emotional turmoil, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding him guilty. Mark Ellison was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And so ends the story of a man who let a single revelation turn love into hatred, and hatred into something irreversible. Cases like this remind us how quickly trust can shatter, and how dangerous secrets can be when they finally surface. If you made it this far, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share your thoughts on this case, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for watching, and have a good one.